South Africans are among those who will benefit from the decision of the United States to reopen its borders on the 8th of next month to foreign travelers that have been fully vaccinated against the coronavirus. The White House says vaccinated people will also need negative COVID-19 tests within 72 hours of travel to the United States. The new rules will also apply to 26 European nations in the Schengen group, as well as the United Kingdom, Brazil, China, India, Iran and Ireland.
The United States will lift COVID-19 travel restrictions for fully vaccinated foreign nationals effective November 8th, ending historic restrictions that, for more than a year, had barred much of the world from entering the country. That's according to the White House Friday, which said non-U.S. air travelers will need to show proof of vaccination before boarding a flight and will need to show proof of a recent negative COVID-19 test. Visitors crossing a land border will not need to show agents a negative test result. The U.S. has lagged many other countries in lifting such restrictions, but now tens of thousands of foreign nationals with relatives or business links in the U.S. will be able to visit again, as long as they're vaccinated. Allies welcomed the move. The White House announcement came just days after it said it would lift restrictions at its land borders and ferry crossings with Canada and Mexico for vaccinated people in early November. There are still some questions on the new policy for foreign nationals, including how and what exemptions the Biden administration will grant to the vaccine requirements.
And for more on this development, via Zoom, we're now joined by Gillian Saunders, who is a tourism consultant. Gillian, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Good evening, Simperian. Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
It is an absolute pleasure having you join us this evening, Gillian. I mean, it is absolutely welcome news for the tourism industry in particular. Just how much of a relief is this news to the local tourism industry?
Well, Simperian, in actual fact, for Americans or people from the US who want to come to South Africa, there hasn't been a restriction for quite a number of months. So USA tourists have been coming here in steadily growing numbers for quite a few months. What the USA did I think they had one of the best regimes for their own people, whereby they looked at the pandemic levels in a destination such as South Africa, and they categorized us according to a level. We were briefly level 4, then we were level 3, and we've just come down to level 2. But the fact is that for a number of months, their levels didn't change anything in terms of if somebody from the USA wanted to travel to South Africa, they were entitled and they could travel. All they needed was a PCR test on the return to the USA. And later on now they've made it, if they're double vaccinated, I think they don't even have to have the PCR test, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah. And South Africa has recently, as we've come down the third wave, been reclassified back to level 2. They have very clear thresholds. When we go below those thresholds, we get classified to a lesser level. And that is just the advisory for the Americans in terms of traveling here. But what America has done that everybody's getting excited about for the 8th of November is allow South Africans, amongst many other nationals, to go into the US. So many countries, in the same way that we were fighting the UK to get us off the red list, the UK was equally as much fighting the USA to say, please let us in. We want British nationals to travel to the UK, to the US. So what the US has done is opened up its own inbound tourism industry now for fully vaccinated people from many, many countries in Europe, ourselves, the UK, but still requiring a PCR test from less than 72 hours before you leave for the USA. So it's great for their tourism industry. There is, of course, when South Africans travel overseas, it's still important because there are two reasons it's important. We still have quite a big component of our industry which does the outbound tourism. And although a lot of that spend goes to the US, the travel agents and the tour operators who organize those tours, some of the money stays in South Africa related to those services to people traveling to the US. Mm-hmm. And the other reason is because two-way traffic creates better demand for airlift. And so we will get more air capacity on the routes. And that helps us bring people from the US here at the same time as South Africans might be traveling to the USA. So the ability to have two-way traffic is vitally important for tourism as it gives us better capacity and the airlines are much more likely to put flights on the routes.
Now, Gillian, it suffices to mention that we are still pretty much in the midst of COVID-19. I mean, we're not talking post-COVID-19 here. We're talking about right now. And here in South Africa in particular, we're faced with a potential fourth wave of COVID-19 infections. And nobody knows how devastating or impactful it might be on our socio-economic fabric here in South Africa. But would you say with a degree of certainty that we're now heading back to a certain level of normality with the opening of these borders?
I think we are. I think countries like the US and the UK, many countries in Europe, Countries like Singapore are looking at what we call starting to treat the COVID pandemic as being an endemic disease. We're learning to live with it. We've got high levels of vaccinations in those countries. And while there is a fair amount of the virus circulating, people are not going to hospital and people are not dying in anything like the same numbers as a percentage of the people with COVID. So they're getting used to living with it. And I've seen data that indicates, for instance, in the UK, that if you currently annualize the COVID deaths, they're no worse now than flu deaths in a normal flu year. So that's what's happening slowly. South Africa and our fourth wave, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of our scientists, people at Discovery Health and the like, as we've been looking at this from a tourism industry perspective. And there's quite a few people who believe our fourth wave shouldn't be as bad as our second and third waves. The reasons are twofold. One is we are getting the vaccinations out. Every day there's another few hundred thousand, a couple of 100,000 people on weekdays are getting vaccinated. We're well over a third of the population who've either had one or two jabs. We have got, I think we're on about 26 or 27% of the population. So 1/4 of the adult population has full immunity from a vaccine. So that coupled with the people who've had who've had COVID previously, which also gives you a certain amount of immunity, means even though we're not at the 80% vaccination rates of some of the other countries, that combination of the growing number who are vaccinated plus they call it seroprevalence, which is immunity from a prior infection, means that we really shouldn't be having such a bad fourth wave. So we hope we're not. It's also summer, which helps keeping people outdoors. The ventilation is the most important thing for not spreading it. And I think it's very encouraging if you actually look at the data now. We're lower than we were between either of the previous waves. We're back to levels in many ways in the stats that we were only experiencing in April and early May in 2020. So it's sort of tentatively encouraging.
What's even more encouraging is the rate of vaccination. I mean, we've reached 20 million vaccinations so far, so it really is encouraging, Gillian. And now the West accounts for a huge chunk of South Africa's tourism revenue. What does the West stand to gain then for the reopening of its borders?
Well, I think there's large tourism industries in every other country as well, or most countries. So the USA, for instance, has a massive tourism industry. They get visitors from the entire world. I mean, the world loves going to the US. They go to New York, they go to Los Angeles, they go to the Grand Canyon and the Redwood Forest, Miami and the beaches. There's a huge amount of attractions in the US. So like us, there will have been a significant tourism industry that has been suffering significantly during all of the COVID pandemic. The same goes for London. London, in particular, is a city that has a massive tourism industry. The pageantry of the royal family there, the history of the city means that they get thousands of tourists. Well, thousands is a low number, but they get many millions of tourists each year in total from across the globe going to cities like that. And those cities' tourism industries and all the support services for the tourism industries have been devastated. So like us, those countries wish to start allowing their tourism industry to rebuild as we move to the more endemic situation with the disease.
And we're now fast approaching the festive season where we will see a huge influx of tourists visiting our shores. But then do you get a sense then that COVID-19 protocols will be in place? Because currently we see so many people not adhering to these protocols, such as the beach. I mean, beachgoers, for instance, no protocol adherence. I mean, no COVID-19 protocol adherence whatsoever. Even at the entertainment centers, which have recently been reopened, people are not adhering to these protocols. So do you think that these measures will be adhered to as we move closer to the festive season?
Well, I sincerely hope so. And I'm rather saddened to hear what you're saying about places like beaches or entertainment centres and the like where people aren't following the protocols. We still need to follow the protocols. It's still law in this country as it stands as well. And so it's important that we do the spacing and the distancing. It's important that we wear masks. Pretty much that's the most important thing, coupled with ventilation. So the tourism industry and the operators in the tourism industry know full well that our foreign tourists who come here would still like to see those measures in place. So they're extremely careful to make sure where they are serving our foreign tourists that they follow the protocols. And we believe the industry is very, very good about that. So I'm saddened to hear there are lapses in certain places. I hope that doesn't happen too much. I think we've also got to remember, though, that some people are coming from countries where they haven't had a mask mandate at the same extent as we've had. And now mask mandates have fallen away in quite a few countries. So some people aren't necessarily expecting or even wanting to wear masks on their holidays. I'm not saying we should take it away. I think we need to keep it at the moment. We haven't got we aren't highly vaccinated at the levels where countries have been able to take the mask mandate away. And even when they've taken it away, there have always been some people who are concerned about that. So I think it's important that we follow the protocols. We must really try very hard to make sure that we observe them properly. I think the most important thing for all of us, though, is to be in ventilated spaces, be outdoors and not be in crowded places. It's an airborne disease, which is now sort of a fact that's well known globally. So the most important thing is ventilation.
Yeah, and the reopening of borders, of course, should not be read in isolation with the airlines. I mean, the airlines have seen an increase in international ticket sales in recent week. There's so much happening in the aviation industry, which has been badly hit by COVID-19 last year. Just how much of an impact will that add onto the tourism industry, both locally and internationally?
Well, I think the airlines, I also actually had a conference, which is the International Air Transport Association, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago. And they were said that there's a sort of an air of quiet but incredible positivity in terms of this is the first time they've really felt that business is coming back. And you've seen some of the airlines globally placing orders for aeroplanes, talking about extra capacities on routes. And so there's a burgeoning resurgence of the aviation industry at the moment. Apparently, there's quite a lot of bookings where business class is being booked more than previously, so leisure travellers are choosing to travel business class. I think people have not spent money. I think when we follow the tourism trends globally, what we've learned is in the developed world, a lot of people have not spent money during COVID because they haven't been able to travel, and so their savings have increased. So now when they go on holiday, they say, well, I'm going to go in luxury style, which is safe because I'm not cramped up in economy with lots of strange people. So the airlines are finding a lot of demand from the leisure travellers for business class, which is great because if you look at the business model of the airlines, in many instances, apart from the low-cost carriers, it's filling up the business class that is much more important than filling up the economy class in terms of actually turning profits on a route. So the airline industry is very I think more than cautiously optimistic, feeling buoyed by the levels of bookings that are coming in. We're seeing a lot of pent-up demand for leisure travel in particular. What the airlines are saying, and we all know this, is business travel is not yet back at the same levels, and there isn't as much pent-up demand. And there's various estimates that either business travel will slowly get back to the same level as it was, or we've lost anything from 15 to 20% of business travel almost permanently because that has been replaced by Zoom and other ways of doing business virtually, Teams, et cetera, So that's probably the case. So where people already know each other, then they can have productive meetings on Zoom. Where you're starting a new business deal, where you're having people get together as a team who didn't work together previously, there's an imperative to face-to-face and there's a benefit to face-to-face, which I think we'll see that certain face-to-face travel will come back, but perhaps not at the full levels it was before.
All right, Gillian Saunders, great chatting to you. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Simpiwe. Thanks very much. Pleasure.
Thank you. That was Gillian Saunders. She is a tourism expert and she's been commenting about the United States reopening its borders to, amongst others, South African travellers.